And that's all there is on getElementById, getElementsByClassName, getElementsByTagName, beep boop. Let's try that again. Hi everybody and welcome to another exciting edition of Boring JavaScript. I'm your host at the Virtuoid, aka Mike Smith, and today we're going to be talking about 5 different ways to be able to get your HTML elements using JavaScript. What are those 5 ways? Well, we'll be covering getElementById, getElementByClassName, actually that's getElementsByClassName, getElementsByTagName, querySelector, and querySelectorAll. Lots of fun today, lots to cover. Let's get started. Now for all 5 of our examples, we're going to be using a single web page. And this web page is very simple. You just type in your name, your email, and your phone number, click on the submit button. It does a validation, prints out some error messages if it finds some error messages, and then does whatever it has to do. And once it's finished, it actually doesn't do anything because I don't really have a server up and running here. Let's take a look at the code and show you how that works. Here is the HTML. It's just standard normal HTML. And what I'm going to be doing here is I'll be replacing this line 25 here with the different JavaScripts that we'll be using to show all 5 of our examples. And the first one we're going to do here, as I said before, is getElementById. So what does getElementById do? Well, first of all, let's take a look at the code. Well, here's an example right up here. getElementById will find an element with the ID attribute set to whatever you pass to it. So it takes one argument, in this case the ID, and then what JavaScript will do is it'll go through each one of the elements on your web page and find that element that has that ID attribute. So I should have a profile form on my file there. Let's go back over to my HTML, and yep, sure enough, there it is right there. So I expect that first one there, here, to return a pointer to my form. I've got 2 more down here, one for num errors and one for num errors plural. So I should have num errors and num errors plural down there. Let's go back to our HTML and yep, there it is. There's my num errors and there's my num errors plural. Now what I've done here is I've set those up so that if I do happen to get errors in the validation, it will print out right here. And if I get more than one, it will print the letter S, or if I just don't get any one there, it will not print out the letter S. I'm sorry, if I get one, can't think. If I get one, it will not print out the letter S. So again, getElementId allows me to get a direct pointer to each one of these particular elements. So what I should expect here, since I've got an add event listener for the submit on the form, once I click on the submit, it's going to process this form, validation it, and if there's errors, I should get a change in the error documentation. You want to see how it works? Let's take a look. Let's go back over to our code here, and let's just do a refresh just to make sure everybody's on the up and up. So I'll just click on submit. Again, the validation just checks to make sure whether the field is filled or not. So click on submit. Yep, 3 errors. Now, I clicked on submit. I know that my add event listener worked because it's the only way validation will work. So I know that my getElementById for the profile form worked great. And I know that my getElementId for the num errors and the num errors plural also worked because it said, yep, indeed I have 3 and I have a multiple number of errors. So it puts the letter S at the very end. Are we certain it's going to work, make that S work? Well, let's find out. Let's put something inside name, put something inside email, but we'll keep phone blank. We click on submit. Yep, worked like a champ. There's my one error, and there's no S at the end, so therefore, the plural worked too. So that is how you use getElementById. Again, the idea here is for you to be able to get an immediate connection to any element that is on your form as long as it has an ID attribute to it. So next, let's take a look at getElementsByClassName. Our second one is getElementsByClassName. And what this will do is this works a lot like getElementById, except that it searches the class attribute for the data or for the argument that you pass. And here's an example right here. So I'm going to look for any class that has the class of error in it. Now again, you can have multiple classes per a class, and it will search for each individual one of those. So you don't have to sit there and type in all of the entire class attributes, just any class that is included within the class attribute. But one real critical distinction here between this and getElementById is the fact that this returns an array. Why? Because you can have the same class in multiple elements. In my particular example, as we'll see here in just a minute, I have a list element that has the class of error when an error occurs. Well, I can have 1, 2, or 3 of them. Actually, I have 0, 2, but I have 1, 2, or 3 of them depending upon what kind of errors that got returned. So getElementsByClassName will always return an array, and if there are no elements, it will return a 0-length array. So what I'm going to do here for this particular example, and again, this is a very poor example. This is just for demonstration purposes only. You know, this, from an efficiency standpoint, don't worry about it, but hey, it's just demo. My validation routine, when it prints out the errors, it gets past the error block here, what it will do is it will append a series of list elements to my unordered list, my UL element. And each one of these, as you can tell, has a class equals error. Now, this class equals error here is what I'm going to then use in the getElementsByClassName to search. So once I print the errors out, I am going to do getElementsByClassName, and the getElementsByClassName will then take a look at any element within the document that has the class of error in it. In my case, I'm going to have 3 of them because when I show you the example here, I'm going to hit the submit button and it's just going to do all 3 of those errors. It's going to have 3 of them in there. It's going to return an array of 3 elements, and then I'm just do what I did before, is I'm going to do the length to get the number of errors and then get the letter S for number of errors of plural. And I'm going to append the word class name here just because I can, and just to kind of differentiate that between that and the getElementById. So you want to see it work? Let's take a look. Let's flip over to our code here. And let's refresh, make sure everything is okie dokie. Then again, I'm just going to hit the submit button. Boom! Hey, it worked exactly like I thought. I have three elements that have the class of error in it, and of course I had the word class name here because I wanted to show you that it's indeed come from the class name. How are we certain that this is actually what happened? Well, let's do an inspect here, and this may be a little bit too small for your screens, but just bear with me here. Let's expand that out a little bit. Here are my 3 list elements. Phone, email, and name are required. Each one of them has a class equals error. So it worked like a champ. It worked exactly the way you're supposed to. And that's all there is to getElementsByClassName. All you have to do is pass it a class you want to search for, and it will return to you an array of elements that contain that class. Next, let's take a look at getElementsByTagName. So now let's cover getElementsByTagName. Well, getElementById gets it by the ID attribute, getElementsByClassName gets it by the className attribute, getElementsByTagName gets it by the tag name, the HTML tag name itself. What exactly is that? Well, for instance, let's take a look at my HTML here. Form is a tag name. P is a tag name. I have these 4 labels here. Label is a tag name. Span is a tag name. Section is a tag name. P is a tag name. UL is a tag name. And so on and so on and so forth. So getElementsByTagName will look at your argument and get any element within your document that will have that particular tag name. It will return an array, because obviously you can have more than one tag within your document. And because of that, you get returned an array. A 0-element array means you couldn't find the tags. Otherwise, every element or every entry within that array is an HTML element. So what I'm going to do here is the same thing I did with the class names, is I'm going to print out the error messages that occur here, and then I'm going to count how many LIs are in there. Because again, my validation, when it prints out the error messages, will print out what will insert LIs or list elements within the unordered list that I have, the UL element. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to count how many LIs there happen to be within the error messages. And again, like I said, with the class names, this is a horrible way of doing it since I already have the information set errors. So again, this is just for demonstration purposes only. Got it? Great. So we're going to count the LIs, and I'm going to change num errors and num errors plural like I have been all the time here. And I've added the word tag name here just to show you that it did indeed come from the tags and not from getElementId or from the getElementsByClassName. Want to see how it works? Let's take a look. Let's go over to our code, let's do a refresh here. Just make sure everybody's on the up and up. And I'm just going to hit the submit button so we can get those 3 errors on there. And boop, yeah, we have 3 tag name errors. It's exactly what I expected. I should have counted 3 LI entries, and here they are, 1, 2, 3. There's 3 LI entries, and because they're multiple, I have S's. Now, are we sure they're LI entries? Well, let's take a look. And again, this may be a little small on your screen here, so let's do an inspect. And sure enough, here are my 3 LIs. LI class equals error, class equals error, class equals error. It counted all 3 of those LIs. Therefore, there are 3 LIs, 3 errors, S on the end. So, again, to go back to it, getElementsByTagName will look at the HTML tag name of the element and give you all the tag names that occur within your document in an array. So those are the 3 different ways that it used to be from a long time ago, from the very beginning when JavaScript was implemented. It was integrated in with browsers. Now, as time went along, they gave us 2 more options to be able to use within the HTML document. It makes things a heck of a lot easier. And we're going to look at the first of those. And the first of those is querySelector, and that's next. So after a time, they realized that getElementById, getElementByClassName, and getElementsByTagName really didn't give you what you needed. You needed a way to be able to globally select elements based upon some other mechanisms. So what they came up with is a way to select elements based upon CSS selectors. Now, I'm not going to go into what CSS selectors are all about. Maybe that's for another Boring JavaScript. In fact, that'd be a great one for another Boring JavaScript. But anyway, they were able to take the concept of CSS selectors and put them into the ability to find elements on your page. And they named the first one querySelector. And the idea with querySelector is that you say querySelector and you pass a CSS selector within or as the argument, and that will find the different element that you're trying to point to. Let me show you how that works. I've gone back now to our getElement screen, and notice that what I did here with the getElement is I used getElementById to find a particular ID. Well, what if it didn't have an ID? How would I actually find it? Well, that's how you'd use querySelector. So let's go to querySelector, and the only thing that's really changed here is instead of saying getElementById, I'm now using querySelector, and I'm passing it a selector that you would normally use within CSS. So if you were to use CSS to take a look at the first child, for example, of a span element within a P element within the error messages ID, this is what you would use to be able to style it. So now also not only can you style it, but you can also find the element. So I am using the CSS selector here that says start with the error messages ID, find any P that happens to be within an error messages ID, and then find the span first child, the first child, or the first child of the span, because there could be multiple spans within the P. Find the first child. And in my particular case here, if I go back to my HTML, here is my error messages ID, here is my P, and the P has 2 spans in it. So the first one says find the first child, which is this one. So this will automatically point me to the num errors. The second one there is the exact same thing, except it says last child. So if I go into here, well, we have 2 children. We have the first span and we have the second span. So the second span happens to be the last child. So that will point me to num errors plural. And other than that, it works exactly the same way as getElementById. But this way, I can use querySelector to return a single element. This will always return a single element. So what if this particular selector gave me a whole bunch of elements? It will return to me the very first element. So if you found 10 elements, it will return to me only the first element. So querySelector returns 1 element and 1 element only. And in this case, that's really what I want here. And so I've got text content, just like the before, to set the number of errors and to set the error length. And that's it. There's really nothing more to it. But querySelector is a great way to be able to find elements within your document based upon CSS queries. So you're not having to ID everything or use specialized class names or anything like that. You want to see how it works? Sure you do. Let's go take a look. So let's go into our JavaScript. Let's just do a refresh and let's click on submit. And you have 3 errors here. Phone, email, name. Exact same thing as before. But now it works because we have 3 errors with the number 3 and the letter S, because now if we flip back over to our code, that's what we have. Here's the 3 errors. Here's whether we print out the letter S or not, but we found the num errors based upon a CSS selector, and we found the num errors plural based upon a CSS selector. So you can find any element anywhere simply by using CSS selectors. So if you're not too familiar with CSS selectors, now's a great time to learn it. Mozilla Developer Network has great articles on it. So that's what querySelector does. Based upon a CSS selector, it will find the first element and return only to you only one element. If you can't find it, it returns to you null. Let's take now a look at its child or its sibling, querySelectorAll. Finally, let's take a look at querySelectorAll. Now, it differentiates itself from querySelector in that it will return to you all of the elements that matches the CSS selector that you pass to it. Whereas querySelector just did one element, querySelectorAll does all of them. So, because of that, it returns to you an array of those elements. So if no elements match, you'll get an empty array, or array of 0 elements. Otherwise, every element that matches the CSS selector will be selected. Now, just like we did with the class names and the tag names here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to print out the errors, and that's going to populate the UL for the error messages. And then I'm going to use querySelectorAll here to be able to pass a CSS selector that will point to every single LI element that happens to have the class name. In this case, again, everything that is within the ID of error messages, find all the ULs, and within all those ULs, find all of the LIs that have a class of error. Real simple CSS selector, and again, if you don't know CSS selectors, just read up of it. It's way far away from this particular subject here. But that's it. That's all we're going to do, is we're going to then populate the num errors and the num errors plural with the number of errors and whether we have the letter S or not based upon the number of errors, just like we did with the other two. You want to see how it works? Yeah, why not? All right, let's go over there. Let's do another refresh, make sure everything is okay. Let's just hit the submit button, and yep, sure enough, we got 3 and no errors. So we now know that the querySelectorAll returned to us an array of 3 elements, and because of that, we got the print of the number 3, and the letter S at the very end. So that's really all there is to querySelectorAll. Pass it the CSS selector, gives you every single element in an array that matches that selector. And that's it. That pretty much covers querySelectorAll. And that's all there is to getElementById, getElementsByClassName, getElementsByTagName, querySelector, and querySelectorAll. I hope you enjoyed our video. Hope I didn't bore you to death. Please visit us at www.boringjavascript.com for all of our videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or check everything out at blog.thevirtuoid.com. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you later.